Welcome you all for the summary and analysis of Chapter 17 of Biographia Literaria. Coleridge is one of the greatest literary critics, and his greatness has been almost recognized universally. He is one of the greatest poet critics that England has ever produced. He is considered the father of Impressionistic criticism, and he introduced philosophy and psychology into literary criticism. Coleridge is the first English critic to base his literary criticism on philosophical principles. He has based literary criticism on human psychology and used it to explain the process of artistic creation. He also revolutionized the concept of imagination and stressed the organic wholeness of a poem. Coleridge was more interested in the creative process, and he himself endeavored that he writes to establish the principles of writing rather than to furnish rules and pass judgment on what has been written by others. About Biographia Literaria. Published in 1817 as a reply to Wordsworth's preface to Lyrical Ballads, it is a work on literary theory. The book contains 24 chapters with subtitle Biographical Sketches of My Literary Life and Opinions. The first part of Biographia Literaria, that is from chapter 1 to 8, deals with his philosophical and metaphysical theories, which Coleridge completed in the year 1815. Thereafter, he wrote preface to the book, which now forms the second part of Biographia Literaria, that is from chapter 14 to chapter 18. It deals with critical analysis of Wordsworth's theory of poetry and poetic diction. The link between the two parts is the poet's theory of imagination. Chapter 17 Summary. In this chapter, Coleridge examines Wordsworth's theories of poetic diction. He says, Wordsworth deserves our prize for his simplicity of poetic diction. Coleridge has described how the figures and metaphors, which were appropriately used by original and ancient poets, were degenerated by Wordsworth. So he objects Wordsworth's theory of poetry. What did Wordsworth's theory state, and why did Coleridge object? Let's see. Wordsworth's theory stated that the proper diction for poetry consists in the language of the men in real life and their natural conversation under the influence of their natural feelings. Coleridge objects this theory. His objections are: the rule of poetic diction is applicable only to certain classes of poetry. It is not applicable even to those classes, except in such a sense as has never been denied or doubted by anyone. Being this rule is useless, it need not be practiced. However, according to Coleridge, the most interesting poems of Wordsworth are Brother, Michael, Ruth, and the Mad Mother. Because according to Coleridge, the persons introduced in these poems are taken from low and rustic life, but their sentiments and language are not connected with their occupations. Coleridge is convinced that human soul cannot flourish and mature in rustic life. When life is destitute of education, the mind is sure to shrink and harden, and man will become selfish and hard-hearted. Under these circumstances, the universe of nature becomes useless beautiful picture to the blind and useless sweet music to the deaf. Coleridge next refers to Aristotle's conception of poetry as ideal. According to Aristotle, the individual characters in poetry should be general and typical. Their feelings should be the whole class to which they belong, no matter of their occupations or status in life. For Coleridge, though Wordsworth's poems are centered around humble figures, they are common to the class. For example, the characters of Wordsworth's brothers and Michael are common to the class. The poems Harry Gill and Idiot Boy portray the feelings of human nature in general. The mother's character in Idiot Boy is not much real for Coleridge. Thus, Coleridge says, Wordsworth has not excluded the disgusting ordinary images in his poems. Therefore, Coleridge does not accept Wordsworth's theory according to which he has selected characters for his poems. Though Wordsworth followed his theory to select characters from rustic background, his character portrayal becomes inferior for Coleridge. Coleridge disagrees with Wordsworth's usage of language for characters in his poems. Wordsworth had said in his preface that the language of these men is simple and unelaborated because of their rank in society and narrow circle of their intercourse. But Coleridge replies that the language of the rustic will not differ from the language of any man of common sense. The experience of the rustic is limited, and the facts at his disposal are scanty. The rustic is acquainted only with a few things, and his life is narrow. Therefore, the words derived from the few objects with which the rustics are familiar cannot be the best part of the language. So he cannot think logically. Therefore, the language of common men lacks expressive vigor, so it is unfit for poetry. For Coleridge, the best part of human language is derived from the reflection and imagination of the mind. The reflection is possible only with properly educated people. One cannot expect reflection and imagination from uneducated men. The speech of the uncivilized tribes is entirely unfit for expressing moral and religious truths. Hence, it is wrong to say that the best part of the language is derived from the objects of nature with which the rustics communicate. Coleridge also objects to the ambiguity or confusion of the word real in the real language of men by Wordsworth. Every man's language varies to the extent of his knowledge and the depth of his feelings. Every man's language has his individual characteristic, the common properties of the class to which he belongs, and words and phrases of universal use. The language of the homeliest or the rustic composition of Wordsworth's poems differs from the language of a common peasant. Therefore, for Coleridge, the word real must be substituted with the word ordinary. Thus, for Coleridge, numerous omissions and changes are needed in the language of rustics before it can be turned into the language of the poetry. Because the language that is spoken by the rustics varies from one country to another. The common language of the rustics exists to everywhere in parts and nowhere as a whole. Thank you.